Once again, the United States and China have experienced a deterioration in their diplomatic relationship due to the controversy of the spy balloon traveling over the mainland of the United States. China has also been conducting military exercises with Russia and South Africa as of late. On top of that, China continues to fly massive amounts of fighter jets near Taiwan. While all of this is going on, President Xi Jinping is continuing to isolate himself more and more, meaning perhaps logic will take a backseat to ideology, as it did with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin. If the worst case scenario happens, and China does decide to invade Taiwan, can the country survive long enough to receive aid from other diplomatic partners like the United States and Japan? Composition of the Taiwanese Air Force. The composition of the Taiwanese Air Force is rather unique in that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense tactically, but it does make a lot of sense historically. During President Carter's administration, advanced weapons were banned from being sold abroad. This prevented Taiwan from procuring advanced fourth-generation aircraft from the United States as they were coming online. At the time, the Northrop F-20 would have been a perfect fit, much like its predecessor, the F-5, which Taiwan already had. While it didn't seem the United States would purchase the aircraft itself, it was still very capable and was in accordance with export regulations at the time. However, when President Reagan took office, he dashed any hopes in the United States of exporting any fighter aircraft to Taiwan. At the time, he was pursuing a program to warm relations with the Chinese Communist Party through the Peace Pearl program. This program even saw United States defense companies upgrading a J-8 interceptor, although this was cancelled by the CCP itself, and oddly not by the United States after the Tiananmen Square massacre. Simultaneously, the Taiwan defense industry reached out to Lockheed Martin to develop a domestic fighter. This resulted in the FCK-1, which used technology developed for the F-16 as well as the radar from Grumman's F-20. Compared to other fourth-generation fighters, the FCK-1 had a pretty decent avionics suite, but its capabilities do not match in terms of kinematic performance, range, or payload. Still, range isn't too much of a concern when the island is only 100 miles from the coast of the mainland. Over time, the relevance of the plane has diminished rather dramatically though. The limitations at the time of development didn't stop it from being better than anything the CCP had at the time. But since then, mainland China's rapid modernization has rendered these aircraft rather obsolete, despite the avionics overhaul that it received recently. Taiwan also has about 60 Mirage 2000s from Dassault, which it purchased in the 90s. At the time of purchase, it would have been the most advanced fighter in Taiwan's arsenal. Having proven itself over Desert Storm, the version Taiwan purchased included many upgrades designed to acknowledge the feedback given by pilots while flying over Iraq. These fighters are mainly intended to be used in the air-to-air role, and as such carry the Mika missile and the Magic II. These missiles were rather competitive in the 90s, though today don't really compare to contemporaries. That said, they are still rather dangerous if employed effectively. The main problem has been the airframe, however, which is aging more rapidly than expected due to Taiwan's climate. As of late, several accidents have grounded the fleet, calling into question if it's worth maintaining them, as they consume the most resources to maintain among the 3 airframes Taiwan has. The last of the 3 airframes mentioned is the F-16 from Lockheed Martin. Purchased in the same time frame as the Mirage 2000, the F-16A had just proven itself over Desert Storm a year earlier. Taiwan received the F-16A Block 20, or more or less the F-16C with the old APG-66 radar still. However, all these aircraft have traveled to the United States and were upgraded to the F-16V Block 70 standard, and additional aircraft have been ordered to expand the fleet. As of now, the F-16 is by far the most potent aircraft in the Taiwanese arsenal, featuring the most modern avionics, the best weapons, and the best kinematic performance, as well as the highest numbers. Armed with AIM-9Ms, AIM-120Cs-5s and 7s, the F-16 is extremely capable. The Communist Threat. China has not only modernized its military capabilities, but has also vastly expanded them very rapidly. It really struck me when reading a blog from the year 2000 how old China's Air Force really was. You read about that sort of thing, but when reading about the tactical capabilities China's equipment had at the time offered, it really clicked in my head instead of just being some general knowledge I had. At the time, China was using third-generation aircraft that would have been from about the 1960s timeframe. At their disposal, they had the MiG-21, which was expanded into the J-8, the MiG-19, which along with the American F-100 were really transitional aircraft from the second and third generation, and the IL-28 bomber. Essentially, the Air Force was only slightly more advanced than Vietnam's during the war in the early 70s. None of these aircraft offered any significant capability against Taiwan. The one exception would have been the Su-27, which China had purchased from a collapsing Russia, although numbers were incredibly low, and the Su-27's avionics were blissfully behind that of Western aircraft. However, in the span of only 23 years, the Chinese Communist Party has completely revamped their Air Force to include aircraft that can not only challenge Western aircraft, but match them. With aircraft like the J-10, they've seen huge numbers produced, and significant modernization between the A, B, and C variants. Meanwhile, China has been domestically producing Soviet aircraft such as the Su-27 and Su-30, though the use of composite materials and more modern avionics suggests them to be far superior to the Russian counterparts. Not only has China created an entire 4th generation Air Force, but 5th generation platforms have also been introduced with the introduction of the J-20. Whether or not the J-20 is as good as American stealth fighters isn't really relevant. What is relevant is that it's a significant step up from 4th generation platforms and is very dangerous. Unlike Russia's Su-57, the J-20 displays advanced manufacturing capabilities. While it won't be as stealthy as the F-22 or F-35, it'll still be much stealthier than the Su-57, or any 4th generation aircraft for that matter. In the span of time it takes for a human to be born, grow up, go through school, and go through college, China has modernized its Air Force from a primarily 1960s Air Force to a modern 21st century Air Force. While China's Air Force likely isn't as good as the United States, it's still the biggest advancement in aviation capability in a given time frame in the history of military aviation. While I expect that progress to soon decline drastically, it doesn't change the fact that China by far has the second most capable Air Force in the world in terms of equipment quality and quantity. During this time, it has also been observed that China has been stockpiling surface-to-surface missiles. The amount of missiles is numbering in the thousands, with some able to reach Guam, while all of them are able to hit Taiwan. The sheer volume can easily overwhelm Taiwan's defense through saturation alone, but China would likely be trying to use a used approach, as any invasion would provoke the United States and Japan into the conflict as well. Additionally, Taiwan has 2 air bases buried in the mountains on the eastern part of the country. This will hamper the effectiveness of missiles used on the country and will protect the Taiwanese Air Force, though how fast they can recover from these missile strikes and get the jet in the air will determine the effectiveness of this strategy. Quality of training. Having advanced equipment doesn't do much good if personnel don't have the training to fully exploit those capabilities. China has been undergoing a radical shift in doctrine as of late. Like any Soviet-supported country, they used the Soviet air defense tactics. A brief overview of Soviet doctrine has the pilot essentially be an extension of the commander on the ground, or a surrogate more or less. This doctrine has been shifting in recent years, however, as China has had squadrons experiment with different philosophies to then implement with the rest of the fleet. This means the PLAA is transitioning from a very rigid tactical approach to a more fluid and dynamic approach that can better address the needs of the situation at hand. Involved in this is getting pilots more flight hours and increasing the variety of training missions, as flying the planes become less ceremonial and more tactical. However, this transition isn't complete and an overall doctrine is still in development, meaning they likely wouldn't be able to fully maximize their force. Taiwan is very much in the same boat, as service in the military is mostly for the sake of maintaining cohesion among citizens. While this is certainly a legitimate use of the military, it doesn't contribute to a tactical capability. The training is mostly ceremonial and doesn't focus much on being actually combat capable. The depth of the training is essentially an introductory course without any ability for soldiers to train specifically for their role. Some claim entire classes had to share a single rifle due to the lack of willingness to spend wartime funds during a time of peace. While the Taiwanese government has announced that this will be changing by spending more on defense and spending more resources training for increased proficiency, this is projected to only start taking effect in 2024, which might not be enough time. The timeline for war has been shortened dramatically by multiple sources, including United States generals, Taiwan's own defense minister, and members from the Chinese Communist Party. Unfortunately, time is just not on the side of Taiwan if any of this is to be taken even remotely true. One thing going in Taiwan's favor, however, is morale. Currently, there is much discontent within the Chinese mainland for the governing body, especially over the COVID lockdowns and the deterioration of the real estate market. Taiwan has seen a massive influx of people volunteering for local militias led by people who have significant military experience serving in foreign militaries. It is believed that citizens are becoming motivated by Ukraine's fight against Russia. Conclusions. From the perspective of air combat, I think Taiwan is definitely the underdog by a significant margin. Taiwan does possess a significant surface-to-surface missile capability, but it pales in comparison to China's massively growing stockpile. However, the occupation is going to be the most difficult portion of any war that breaks out. China currently doesn't have the logistical means to move enough equipment and personnel across the strait into Taiwan, something they're trying desperately to rectify through various means. Even then, they'll have to contend with a determined populace to resist their advances. By then, the United States coalition will likely be appearing on scene and aiding Taiwan. Any invasion, much to the dismay of the CCP, really isn't practical past the initial air war. It just doesn't make sense for China to initiate the conflict, logically speaking. Unfortunately, logic isn't the only factor when dealing with human nature. Humans are often driven by primal emotion and instinct, often negating any logical tendencies. More and more, Xi is isolating himself as he wraps up internal efforts to rid the CCP of rivals, which is extremely concerning. This means he's likely less exposed to contrarians and mostly just receiving confirmation bias from constituents who are motivated by maintaining their position within the party. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this video informative. The goal of this channel is to cut through all the prevalent bias and present aviation news and insight so people can stay better informed. If you enjoy this content, then please subscribe. In the meantime, enjoy your dance with the angels.